Neighborhood where your cattle used to graze. Families unpacking U-Hauls, kids chalking driveways, all on your property without permission. Victoria Ashworth had the audacity to serve me with a restraining order, claiming I was threatening families with surveying equipment. This woman stole my land, then painted me as the dangerous neighbor terrorizing innocent children. What she didn't know? My grandfather's 1924 contract means every house she built automatically became mine the moment they poured the first foundation. Soon she'd learn why you never steal from a land surveyor who's been documenting property theft for 40 years, especially when federal law is on your side. Before we dive in, what would you do if someone built 98 houses on your land? Drop your revenge fantasies below and tell me where you're watching from. My name's Ezekiel Thornfield. Friends call me Zeke, and I'm what you might call old-school Tennessee stubborn. At 67, I've spent 40 years as a land surveyor, walking property lines and settling boundary disputes across 3 counties. My grandfather left me 847 acres of prime rolling hills back in '94, along with a piece of advice. Boy, never trust a man who measures land without getting his boots muddy. The morning mist here in Millbrook County carries the sweet scent of honeysuckle mixed with diesel exhaust from the interstate. That's progress creeping into farm country, I suppose. Every dawn, I'd walk my fence lines with black coffee, listening to gravel crunch under my boots while checking for storm damage. The metallic taste of well water and the earthy smell of cattle reminded me this was real farming, not the suburban fantasy taking over Tennessee. My late wife Martha used to say I kept property records like other men collect baseball cards, obsessively and with pride that borders on insanity. When she passed 5 years ago, our 2 kids moved off to chase city dreams in Portland and Atlanta. Can't blame them for wanting more excitement than watching grass grow, but it left me rattling around a 1952 farmhouse with just my heritage cattle and memories. Enter Victoria Ashworth. Call me Vicky. The kind of woman who treats a clipboard like a nuclear weapon and speaks in passive-aggressive corporate speak that could make Gandhi throw punches. At 52, she's mastered that suburban HOA president look, blonde highlights fresh from the salon, white Lexus SUV detailed weekly, and the dead-eyed smile of someone who's reported neighbors for having the wrong shade of mailbox. Vicky's married to Brad Ashworth, our town councilman, which around Sweetwater Springs means she thinks she's royalty. For 8 years, she had been circling my property like a buzzard, sending intermediaries with insulting offers for my unused pasture land. The smell of desperation was stronger than her department store perfume every time she showed up uninvited with another generous proposal. The real trouble started when I returned from a 3-week visit helping my daughter Sarah through a messy divorce in Oregon. I'd been looking forward to getting back to my quiet routine, coffee at sunrise, checking cattle, maybe fixing fence posts if I felt ambitious. You know, the kind of retirement that doesn't involve conference calls or HOA drama. But driving up my gravel driveway, something felt wrong. Instead of cattle lowing and meadowlarks singing, I heard the suburban symphony of lawnmowers humming and children shrieking, sounds that had no business being on my back 40 acres. I grabbed my surveying equipment and headed toward the noise, figuring maybe some kids were trespassing or a family had broken down near my property line. Walking through my pasture, the air carried unfamiliar scents of fresh asphalt and new lumber instead of wildflowers and creek water. What I found made my coffee mug slip from my hands and explode against a limestone rock. 98 pristine houses spread across my land like a suburban infection. Manicured lawns where my Angus cattle used to graze. A decorative stone entrance reading Heritage Meadows Estates, in script fancier than a wedding invitation. Families unpacking U-Hauls. Kids drawing chalk masterpieces on driveways. Golden retrievers chasing tennis balls. The whole American dream package built on every acre of my back pasture. I stood there gawking like a tourist, wondering if I'd somehow driven to the wrong county. But there was my grandfather's oak tree with Martha's initials carved in the bark. There was Willow Creek where I'd learned to fish. This was definitely my land, but somebody had turned it into suburbia without bothering to ask permission. That's when Vicky materialized in a golf cart wearing an official HOA badge, rolling toward me like she owned the place. Which, judging by her smug expression, she absolutely believed she did. "Excuse me, sir," she announced in that syrupy tone that immediately made my jaw clench. "This is private property. Heritage Meadows is a gated community for residents and invited guests only." I looked around at my trees, my creek, the land where my grandfather taught me to respect property boundaries, and realized I was about to get a masterclass in small-town corruption. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice steady despite wanting to explode, "I think there's been some kind of mistake. This is my property. Has been since 1994. Vicky's laugh sounded like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Oh, honey, I'm afraid you're confused. The Heritage Meadows development was purchased legally from Millbrook Development Corporation 2 years ago." She pulled out a folder thick enough to choke a horse, flipping through pages with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged. "See? Right here, 847 acres purchased for fair market value. I'm sure this is just a surveying error on your part." The condescension in her voice made my blood pressure spike, but 40 years of dealing with property disputes taught me to document everything and stay calm when someone's trying to rob you blind. "Mind if I see those documents?" "I'm not legally required to share private HOA business with trespassers," she sniffed, clutching that folder like it contained nuclear launch codes. "But I'll tell you what, I'm feeling generous today. These families have children starting school in 2 weeks. Surely we can work out some arrangement that doesn't disrupt their lives." That's when I knew this wasn't a mistake. This was a con job wrapped in suburban righteousness. 3 days later, Deputy Mike Ashworth knocked on my door with papers and a smirk that told me everything about getting fair treatment in this county. The restraining order claimed I'd trespassed on Heritage Meadows property and threatened residents with surveying equipment in a menacing manner. Apparently, carrying a measuring tape now qualified as brandishing a weapon. The order prohibited me from entering my own back 40, and Mike made sure to mention that violation meant jail time. Vicky wasn't done flexing her suburban warfare muscles. Within a week, every Heritage Meadows resident received a letter about the unstable former landowner who posed a potential safety risk to families and children. She organized a neighborhood safety committee that patrolled my property line with the dedication of border guards, snapping photos of me feeding my own cattle like I was running a meth lab. The social media assault came next. Vicky posted side-by-side photos on the Sweetwater Springs Facebook group, my weathered farmhouse versus the pristine subdivision, claiming my unkempt property was attracting vermin and lowering property values. The comment section exploded into digital warfare between locals who knew my family and newcomers who bought Vicky's performance hook, line, and sinker. But here's where 40 years of surveying experience pays dividends. While Vicky was busy playing victim online, I drove to the county courthouse and started pulling records. The filing fee for that supposed property transfer caught my eye immediately, $50 measly. Back in my early days surveying, I learned that Tennessee requires big property transfers to have notarized affidavits with multiple witnesses and filing fees that match the transaction size. This smelled fishier than week-old catfish. The real smoking gun was the notary stamp. Eleanor Hutchins had handled real estate closings for 3 decades, sweet old lady who made the best peach cobbler in the county. Problem was, Eleanor died 6 months before she allegedly notarized my property transfer. Unless she was signing documents from the great beyond, somebody had forged her stamp. I called my old surveyor buddy Clarence Bulldog McKenzie, who's forgotten more about property law than most lawyers ever learn. Bulldog spent 2 days with his GPS equipment walking every inch of my boundaries, spitting tobacco juice, and muttering about amateur hour fraud attempts. "Zeke," he finally said, "your property lines are accurate within 6 inches. That whole subdivision is sitting on your land like fleas on a hound dog." While I was building my case, Vicky escalated to psychological warfare. Sentinel Security Services started patrolling Heritage Meadows in golf carts with radio headsets, like my Angus cattle posed a terrorist threat. Then came the state licensing board complaint, claiming I was mentally declining and dangerous to public safety. Her evidence? Insisting on accessing my own property. The county piled on by threatening to condemn my farmhouse as a public nuisance. Apparently, 70 years of honest wear made my home an eyesore compared to the cookie-cutter McMansions squatting on my pasture. That evening, checking my fence line in the dying light, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Security cameras hidden in my oak trees with cables snaking back toward Heritage Meadows. The acrid smell of electrical connections and fresh-cut plastic told the story. They'd been tapping into my power meter to run surveillance equipment. Years ago, I'd helped a client catch copper thieves using an electromagnetic field detector from the hardware store, and the same technique revealed months of unauthorized monitoring. I sat in Martha's garden as crickets chirped and the scent of her climbing roses filled the evening air, wondering if I should just take whatever money Vicky offered and retire somewhere warm. Then I remembered my grandfather's words after the railroad company tried to steal our mineral rights back in '89. Son, when someone tries to steal your land, they're not just taking dirt, they're stealing your family's history. Martha had agreed, writing in her journal that night, Zeke never backs down from protecting what's right. Time to honor that legacy. 2 weeks later, Vicky pulled her media card. Channel 7 News rolled up to Heritage Meadows like they were covering a presidential assassination, complete with satellite truck and enough camera equipment to film a Hollywood movie. The story? Elderly man's delusions threaten young families. They interviewed concerned mothers clutching designer babies, painted me as a confused hermit living in the past, and gave Vicky 5 uninterrupted minutes to perform her Oscar-worthy victim routine. "We just want to live peacefully," she sobbed, dabbing eyes with tissues that looked suspiciously dry. "It breaks my heart to see someone so confused, but we can't let one person's mental decline endanger our children." The segment made me look like the villain in a Lifetime movie about suburban terror. But while Vicky was busy winning Emmy Awards for fake crying, I was doing what surveyors do best, following paper trails and connecting dots. My property insurance got canceled the next morning. The letter claimed significant change in land usage voided my policy based on aerial photos showing residential development. Now here's something interesting I learned helping my neighbor Jim catch insurance fraud back in '03. Agents often use inside access to trigger cancellations, leaving victims vulnerable right before something unfortunate happens. Turns out little Vicky worked part-time for Mutual Trust Insurance, the same company that dropped me. She'd used her database access to sabotage my coverage, timing it perfectly with her legal assault. The legal system revealed its true face when Judge Harold Pemberton scheduled an emergency hearing. Pemberton golfed with Brad every Thursday and owned stock in 3 development companies. Conflict of interest wasn't in his vocabulary. My court-appointed attorney showed up smelling like bourbon and mispronounced my name twice before advising me to accept reality and negotiate. When I demanded a jury trial, they postponed indefinitely, probably hoping I'd die of old age first. Meanwhile, Vicky convinced Heritage Meadows families that their property values would crater if the crazy old man won. She created a defense fund and collected $50,000 for legal expenses. Funny how that money funded the Ashworth's European vacation. Brad's Facebook photos from Tuscany wine tours were quite educational. The residents organized car washes and bake sales, unknowingly funding their own exploitation with the enthusiasm of cult members. I wasn't sitting idle, though. Every conversation got recorded on my smartphone using an app Sarah installed, with timestamps and GPS coordinates that would hold up in federal court. Trail cameras went up around my property perimeter, all positioned legally, but capturing every bit of their harassment campaign. The intimidation escalated fast. Dead animals appeared on my porch, possums mostly, though someone upgraded to a raccoon that stank like week-old roadkill. Nails scattered across my driveway flattened my truck tires twice. Anonymous calls promised accidents happen to stubborn old men, always at 3 a.m. when the threat felt most real. They blocked access to my own mailbox, claiming it sat on Heritage Meadows easement property. Sentinel security guards threatened arrest if I collected my own mail. The irony of stealing mail while accusing me of trespassing wasn't lost on anyone with half a brain. That's when my guardian angel arrived wearing jeans and carrying a notebook. Ruby Morgan, investigative reporter for the Nashville Tribune, had moved to small-town Tennessee seeking peace after big city burnout. She approached me after watching Channel 7's Hatchet Job, her legal reporting instincts screaming that something stunk worse than my septic tank. "Mr. Thornfield," she said, "I've covered enough white-collar crime to recognize a con job. Mind if I examine your documentation?" Ruby spent 3 days independently reviewing public records, confirming my ownership and discovering Heritage Meadows marketing materials dated 2 years before the alleged purchase. Her experience covering financial fraud taught her that internet archives never lie. The Wayback Machine revealed deleted web pages showing development plans from 2021, proving premeditation. She uncovered Brad's sealed juvenile record for real estate fraud in Kentucky. Our town councilman had previous experience stealing property, just never attempted grand theft on this scale. The county escalated to eminent domain threats, claiming Heritage Meadows provided essential housing for community growth. They appraised my 847 acres at $80,000 agricultural value, ignoring the $12 million residential potential. Classic government theft: steal property for pennies, hand it to developer cronies for millions. My water well got contaminated overnight, cattle started showing poisoning symptoms traced to Heritage Meadows storm drain runoff. The subdivision violated environmental regulations, leaching toxic construction materials into groundwater feeding my well and Willow Creek. Stress finally caught up with me. Hospital admission for chest pains, doctors recommending conflict reduction and assisted living. That's when Vicky revealed her true nature, visiting with crocodile tears and a $200,000 settlement offer. "Zeke," she whispered, leaning over my hospital bed like a vulture, "this could all disappear tomorrow. Think about your family. Is dirt really worth dying over?" Lying there with heart monitors beeping, antiseptic smell burning my nostrils, and IV needles pricking my arm, I realized this transcended property disputes. This was about stopping criminals who'd victimized an entire community while hiding behind suburban respectability. Time to fight back. Getting out of that hospital bed felt like waking up from a nightmare into a war zone. While I'd been playing invalid, Vicky and Brad had been busy cementing their theft with political maneuvering slick enough to make Vegas con artists jealous. Brad introduced an emergency city council resolution to annex Heritage Meadows into Sweetwater Springs city limits, a bureaucratic masterstroke that hit me like a brick to the skull. City jurisdiction would override county property laws, placing the subdivision under municipal control where Brad's influence ran deeper than a Tennessee sinkhole. They'd fast-tracked the vote for 10 days out, buried the notice in legal classifieds where only lawyers and land surveyors dare to tread. Ruby's investigation shifted into overdrive, uncovering document fraud that made Watergate look like amateur hour. Computer forensics revealed Brad's operation was playing copy and paste with notary stamps, stealing digital signatures from legitimate transactions like a teenager pirating movies. The Eleanor Hutchins forgery wasn't isolated. They'd been grave-robbing dead notaries' identities across 4 counties. Heritage Meadows families started receiving HOA special assessments that would make a loan shark blush. Vicky demanded thousands per household to fund the legal battle, threatening foreclosure for non-payment. She was literally extorting the people she'd supposedly protected, charging them premium prices to defend property they didn't legally own. The irony was thicker than Martha's cornbread. Residents paying to help steal their own money. Several families contacted me secretly, voices trembling over phone calls made after midnight when their children were asleep. They'd started questioning why their HOA queen needed BMW payments to fight one old man with a measuring tape. I hired an independent building inspector using Ruby's newspaper budget. Turns out journalistic integrity sometimes comes with funding for exposing corruption. What he found made my surveyor's soul weep. 47 major code violations, including houses built on wooden platforms over buried swampland without proper septic permits. The electrical systems violated county fire codes so badly that one spark could turn Heritage Meadows into a suburban bonfire. Vicky's desperation peaked when she tried bribing Dr. Stevens to declare me mentally incompetent. $20,000 to falsify dementia diagnosis and recommend guardianship proceedings. The good doctor recorded every word. She'd also hired some bottom-feeder private investigator to fabricate stories about my military service, claims so ridiculous that any veteran could debunk them between sips of coffee. The environmental revelation hit like lightning on a golf course. Ruby discovered Heritage Meadows was built over federally protected wetlands without EPA permits, violating more environmental laws than an oil spill. The original survey had been falsified by Brad's consulting company, claiming sensitive marsh habitat was non-significant grassland. They'd destroyed rare salamander breeding grounds, triggering Endangered Species Act violations, carrying $25,000 in daily fines, enough money to buy every house in the subdivision twice over. Danny Kowalski finally broke his silence after months of threats against his family. The former construction foreman provided copies of the real environmental survey plus photos of Brad ordering crews to dump concrete over protected wetlands. Danny had quit rather than participate in environmental destruction, then endured harassment for having a conscience, apparently a rare commodity in the construction business these days. Ruby's financial investigation traced Heritage Meadows funding through more shell companies than a 3-card Monte game, connected to overseas accounts that screamed money laundering louder than a tornado siren. The construction loans were secured using my property as collateral without my knowledge, creating fraud so blatant that bank executives would face federal conspiracy charges when this house of cards collapsed. The homeowner's awakening was brutal and swift. Property deeds were worthless, title insurance excluded contested land coverage, and families faced losing homes while still owing mortgages on houses they never legally owned. Secret resident meetings sprouted like mushrooms after rain. discussing class action lawsuits against the people who'd sold them the American dream built on environmental disaster. Vicky announced a Heritage Meadows Family Festival to demonstrate community support, her final desperate play for public sympathy. Politicians, law enforcement, and media were invited to witness how normal families were being terrorized by one disturbed neighbor. She'd scheduled the festival for the same day as the city council annexation vote, planning to pressure politicians with images of children enjoying bounce houses while the crazy old farmer tried to steal their homes. But two can play the timing game. Ruby coordinated federal EPA inspectors to schedule their wetlands investigation for Festival Day. Danny agreed to testify about environmental cover-ups. I'd compiled evidence packages showing the full fraud scope, including my grandfather's 1924 railroad contracts that these amateurs never researched. The stage was set for a showdown that would expose 2 decades of corruption in front of half the county. The sweet smell of barbecue smoke and cotton candy would soon mix with the acrid stench of burning lies. Vicky thought she was orchestrating a public relations victory to cement her theft. Instead, she was about to learn why you never steal from a man who documents every square inch of dirt in 3 counties. Festival Day was coming, and I planned to give Heritage Meadows a celebration they'd never forget. Ruby's phone call at 6 a.m. 3 days before the festival changed everything. "Zeke, get down to the courthouse basement right now. I found something that's going to blow this case apart like dynamite in a henhouse." I drove through morning fog, thick as Martha's gravy, my heart hammering harder than a teenager's first date. Ruby met me at the courthouse back entrance, wild-haired and clutching coffee-stained papers like she'd discovered the Holy Grail buried under decades of bureaucratic dust. "The railway archives," she gasped, dragging me down creaky wooden stairs into a basement that smelled like mothballs and forgotten promises. I was researching easement law for another story when I stumbled across these beauties. She spread yellowed documents across a table under fluorescent lights that flickered like dying lightning bugs. Original 1924 railroad easement contracts, sealed in manila envelopes that hadn't seen daylight since Eisenhower was president. The musty paper crackled under my fingers like autumn leaves, and suddenly I could hear my grandfather's voice echoing through 9 decades. "Your grandfather was a stone-cold genius, Zeke. Look at Clause 7. My hands trembled, reading the faded typewriter text that would make modern lawyers weep with professional envy. Ezekiel Thornfield Sr. hadn't just negotiated mineral rights with Tennessee Central Railroad. He'd secured development protections stronger than Fort Knox. Any unauthorized structures built on Thornfield property would automatically transfer ownership to the family, along with every improvement, fixture, and blade of grass. "Sweet mother of pearl," I whispered, tasting the metallic tang of shock in my mouth. Grandpa saw this coming a century ago. The contract language was ironclad. Unauthorized construction automatically voided competing land claims and transferred all improvements to the rightful owner. Filed with the Federal Railway Commission, it carried jurisdiction that made state property law look like suggestions scrawled on napkins. No county judge, city council, or HOA queen could touch these rights. They were protected by federal transportation law older than sliced bread. Ruby's detective work revealed the smoking gun. My property extended 200 feet beyond current survey markers, encompassing not just 98 houses, but Heritage Meadows clubhouse, swimming pool, tennis courts, and that precious 9-hole golf course where Brad played every weekend. Satellite imagery from 2019 showed boundary stakes mysteriously relocated during one of my Oregon visits. Total theft includes recreational facilities worth $8 million, Ruby calculated, spreading printouts like a Vegas dealer. Under your grandfather's contract, Vicky just handed you a $42 million gift wrapped in suburban stupidity. The beautiful irony made me laugh until tears ran down my cheeks. 98 houses at $350,000 each, plus amenities, all mine thanks to a contract these amateurs never researched. The 1924 agreement had no statute of limitations, meaning their fraud actually strengthened my position instead of threatening it. Ruby had traced Brad's connection to the Railway Historical Society, discovering he'd accessed these same documents 3 years ago through genealogy research. Email evidence revealed a detailed theft plan, knowing about the easement clause but gambling I'd never find the original contracts. He thought he could outsmart a family that's been documenting property rights since Warren G. Harding was president, Ruby chuckled. But he made one crucial miscalculation. The insurance implications were staggering. Heritage Meadows carried $50 million in fraudulent coverage based on false ownership documents. When this collapsed, insurance companies would face liability exposure bigger than their executive bonuses. Federal jurisdiction meant local corruption couldn't protect the Ashworths anymore. U.S. Marshals would enforce the 1924 contract with authority that made county sheriffs look like mall security guards. The strategic advantage was overwhelming. I didn't need to prove ownership because Grandpa's contract automatically granted it. Vicky's festival would become her public execution, and she was about to hand me the rope while the cameras rolled. Ruby's kitchen table disappeared under an avalanche of legal documents, maps, laptops, and enough coffee cups to fuel a NASA launch. The sweet aroma of her homemade blueberry muffins battled the acrid smell of printer ink as we plotted the downfall of Heritage Meadows' suburban empire. Martha would have loved this. Organized chaos with a righteous purpose. Marcus Webb arrived looking like federal justice in a tailored suit. This silver-haired prosecutor had spent 40 years sending white-collar criminals to prison, and his wire-rimmed glasses had witnessed more courtroom victories than a Kentucky Derby champion. He reviewed our evidence with surgical precision. "Your grandfather's 1924 contract is tighter than bark on a tree," Marcus said, spreading the yellow documents like poker cards. "I've prosecuted 12 railway easement cases. This language is so bulletproof it could stop a freight train." Dr. Sarah Lightfoot joined via video call, her EPA credentials adding environmental felonies to our growing list of charges. The wetlands damage assessment made my surveyor soul weep. $15 million to restore habitat that had taken centuries to develop naturally. "The salamander species they destroyed is federally protected," Dr. Lightfoot explained, her voice carrying congressional testimony authority. "Daily fines compound faster than a teenager's credit card debt. We're talking generational bankruptcy." Danny Kowalski arrived looking like a man who'd been carrying concrete guilt for months. The former construction foreman spread blueprints across Ruby's table, revealing engineering disasters that would make any builder's insurance agent faint. "These houses are death traps on stilts," Danny said, his calloused finger tracing foundation plans. "Brad ordered pressure-treated lumber instead of proper concrete pilings to save money. Families are living in expensive houseboats that don't know they're sinking yet." The gallows humor wasn't lost on anyone. Heritage Meadows residents were literally living above their problems. Patty Goldman, our forensic accountant, connected financial dots with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found buried treasure in Excel spreadsheets. Her laptop displayed money trails that looked like spaghetti art created by drunken toddlers. "Total fraud exceeds 89 million, Patty announced, each number landing like artillery shells. They pre-sold 150 lots using fake ownership documents. Bernie Madoff would be impressed by this Ponzi scheme's ambition." Ruby orchestrated media strategy with military precision, marking our whiteboard timeline like D-Day invasion plans. EPA inspection at 11 during opening ceremonies, federal marshals at 1 during face painting. My story goes live at 2 when families check phones over barbecue. The coordination impressed even my surveyor's love of detailed planning. EPA handled environmental crimes, FBI covered financial fraud, and U.S. Marshals would serve papers that local corruption couldn't touch. Like watching a Swiss watch designed by angry federal agents. My biggest concern was protecting innocent families caught in Vicky's web. Marcus had researched victim compensation programs while I developed fair rent-to-own agreements for residents who wanted to stay. "These people bought the American dream from professional liars," I insisted, tasting the metallic determination that meant no compromise on principles. "We'll expose the criminals without destroying the casualties." Technology deployment turned Ruby's journalism team into a documentary crew. Discrete recording equipment, live streaming capability, and evidence collection systems would capture every moment for federal prosecution and social media transparency. The decoy operation required acting skills I didn't know this old surveyor possessed. I'd pretend to negotiate with Vicky during the festival, keeping the Ashworths distracted while federal agents positioned like chess pieces around Heritage Meadows. Reverend James Mitchell provided moral authority that small-town corruption couldn't dismiss. His Methodist church would shelter displaced residents while his historical knowledge about the Thornfield family's century-long community presence gave weight to our cause. Professional exhibits prepared for media would tell the story without words. Before and after photos of wetlands destruction, side-by-side forgery comparisons, and water contamination evidence would make evening news editors weep with journalistic joy. Backup plans covered every nightmare scenario from local interference to flight risks. Evidence lived in multiple secure locations. Civil rights attorneys stood ready for retaliation, and 3 national news networks had contacts warming up for potential coverage. The evening before festival day, I visited Martha's grave as sunset painted the sky colors she'd loved, soft purples and golds that reminded me why this land mattered beyond money or property rights. Her journal entry from our 20th anniversary echoed in memory. Zeke fights for what's right, not what's easy. Kneeling beside her headstone, breathing the sweet scent of honeysuckle that grew wild around her resting place, I made a promise. Tomorrow would expose 20 years of corruption while protecting families who'd been victimized by their own dreams. Vicky had planned a festival to celebrate her theft. Instead, she was about to host the most expensive public confession in Tennessee history, served with a side of federal justice and broadcast live for anyone with internet access. The irony tasted sweeter than Ruby's blueberry muffins. Festival morning arrived with the kind of picture-perfect weather that made Vicky believe God himself endorsed her suburban theft. Heritage Meadows sparkled like a movie set, decorated with enough balloons and banners to make Disney World jealous. The smell of barbecue smoke and cotton candy mixed with fresh-cut grass created an atmosphere of wholesome family fun that would have been heartwarming if it wasn't built on decades of fraud. Vicky had pulled out every manipulation trick in the suburban playbook. Children's choirs performed at the opening ceremony, local politicians gave speeches about protecting family values, and media cameras focused on sympathetic families while carefully avoiding the federal agents positioned discreetly around the festival grounds like well-dressed wolves. The night before, someone had cut my internet and phone lines, amateur hour intimidation that made me laugh harder than a Three Stooges marathon. My truck tires got slashed again, and a threatening note appeared on my windshield promising, "Accidents happen to stubborn old fools." Ruby's car got vandalized with spray paint reading "Media Lies" in letters that looked like a kindergartner's first attempt at rebellion. Brad had called an emergency city council meeting for Saturday morning, pushing the Heritage Meadows annexation vote with the desperation of a used car salesman on the last day of the month. 3 council members received anonymous $10,000 donations the day before. Ruby's cameras caught the cash handoffs in parking lots like some low-budget spy movie. My bank accounts got frozen Friday afternoon, supposedly due to suspicious activity and money laundering investigation. The bank manager, Brad's brother-in-law, refused to explain specifics beyond bureaucratic double talk that would make a tax attorney proud. Suddenly, I couldn't access funds for legal fees or groceries, financial warfare designed to force surrender through starvation. Vicky cranked up the family manipulation, telling residents I planned to bulldoze houses immediately after winning, leaving children homeless before school started. She created fake social media profiles spreading rumors about my mental health with the dedication of a teenage cyberbully. Heritage Meadows parents organized protective patrols around the subdivision, like their children faced invasion from one old man with surveying equipment. The construction evidence destruction began overnight. Crews arrived with truckloads of clean soil to cover contaminated areas, attempting to hide environmental violations before EPA inspection. Danny documented the cover-up with hidden cameras, capturing federal obstruction of justice that carried 5-year prison sentences. Brad contacted state environmental officials claiming Ruby's investigation was fake news, arranging for a friendly local TV station to interview concerned residents about media harassment. Social media bots flooded Heritage Meadows posts with supportive comments that read like they were written by the same person using a thesaurus. Vicky hired Nashville's most aggressive law firm, filing a $50 million defamation suit against Ruby and her newspaper. They demanded retraction of all fraud stories and attempted to get injunctions blocking festival day coverage, basically trying to win through legal intimidation what they couldn't accomplish through actual innocence. Someone tipped off EPA inspectors about security threats at the festival, filing anonymous complaints about federal overreach and bureaucratic harassment of working families. Brad's political connections pressured EPA to delay investigation, playing jurisdictional games that would make constitutional lawyers weep. The community split down the middle like a badly designed subdivision. Longtime residents chose sides based on decades-old grudges, local businesses faced boycott threats for supporting either party, and the Chamber of Commerce divided faster than divorce proceedings. Private security increased around Heritage Meadows, with guards following Ruby while she worked, unmarked cars parked outside my property overnight, and harassment campaigns that included construction noise starting at 6 every morning. The smell of diesel exhaust and dust became constant reminders that Vicky would destroy the peaceful countryside to protect her theft. Danny Kowalski received death threats complete with family photos marked with red X's, witness intimidation that crossed federal lines into terrorism territory. His employer got pressured to fire him for unreliable behavior, forcing FBI to place Danny in witness protection. Vicky's desperation reached pathetic levels when she contacted my adult children in Oregon and Georgia, claiming their father was having a mental breakdown and suggesting guardianship proceedings to protect his assets. She implied I was dishonoring Martha's memory by fighting for family land, psychological manipulation that would make cult leaders take notes. The insurance scam exposure came when Ruby discovered Heritage Meadows policies were printed on stolen letterhead from legitimate companies. Residents' homeowner insurance would be denied because the policies never existed, leaving families facing financial disaster without coverage. Brad filed emergency motions to halt federal investigation, court shopping for friendly judges, and claiming agencies lacked jurisdiction over local property disputes. He submitted dozens of procedural motions designed to delay and confuse, procedural warfare that made tax code look simple. Festival Day crystallized into the final battleground where truth would face suburban lies under bright Tennessee sunshine. Media crews arrived like cavalry reinforcements, federal agents positioned discreetly, and community tension reached breaking point. The sweet smell of funnel cakes and the innocent laughter of children would soon mix with the bitter taste of exposed corruption and federal justice served cold. Festival Day morning broke with the kind of oppressive humidity that makes Tennessee summers legendary and tempers shorter than a roadside firecracker. Heritage Meadows looked like Norman Rockwell's fever dream, red, white, and blue bunting draped over stolen land, children's laughter echoing across wetlands that had been murdered for suburban sprawl. Vicky orchestrated her final performance at the festival gazebo, staging a public settlement meeting with all the subtlety of a Broadway musical. She'd brought microphones, speakers, and an oversized cardboard check for $300,000, playing to cameras like she was accepting an Academy Award for Best Supporting Victim. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to the gathering crowd, dabbing her eyes with tissues that looked suspiciously dry, "I'm here to demonstrate how reasonable people can resolve conflicts without destroying families." The oversized check fluttered in the breeze like a surrender flag made of lies. I played my part in this theatrical farce, pretending to consider her offer while federal agents positioned around the festival like pieces on a chessboard. The smell of barbecue smoke and cotton candy couldn't mask the metallic taste of justice approaching faster than a summer thunderstorm. Dr. Sarah Lightfoot arrived discreetly during the children's puppet show, carrying EPA testing equipment disguised in a family picnic basket. She began soil and water sampling around the festival area, discovering fresh concrete poured over wetlands overnight, evidence tampering that added federal obstruction charges to the growing list. Ruby's financial investigation had uncovered the international money laundering connection that morning. Heritage Meadows was funded through Russian shell companies connected to a real estate fraud ring operating in 12 states. Brad Ashworth wasn't just a small-town crook. He was connected to an international criminal enterprise that made local corruption look like shoplifting candy bars. Maria Santos, the elementary school teacher who lived in Heritage Meadows with her 2 young daughters, approached Ruby during the face-painting activity. Her hands trembled as she showed forged notary signatures on her deed, recognizing Brad's handwriting from his campaign materials. "I trusted them," Maria whispered, glancing nervously at her children getting butterfly designs painted on their cheeks. "They said we were buying our forever home, but everything was lies." Her courage would become the crack that shattered Vicky's facade of community protection. The media ambush came during the lunch hour when Brad arranged a surprise television interview to attack my credibility. Channel 7's cameras rolled as he portrayed me as a confused elderly man endangering innocent families, with delusions about property ownership that threatened children's safety. The interview was interrupted by federal marshals serving arrest warrants live on television. Brad's face transformed from smug confidence to panic faster than a teenager caught shoplifting as handcuffs clicked around his wrists during the broadcast. His protests about deep state conspiracies and government overreach played perfectly for evening news sound bites. Vicky's meltdown began when she realized Brad's arrest exposed their entire conspiracy. Standing beside the bounce house where toddlers played innocent games, she started screaming at federal agents about constitutional rights and government persecution. Her accusations that EPA was part of a liberal conspiracy against honest Americans got recorded by dozens of phones, creating viral social media content that destroyed any remaining credibility. Ruby's newspaper released the complete evidence package online while families ate barbecue and checked their phones. Interactive timelines showed 4 years of fraud conspiracy, financial records proved international money laundering, and document comparisons revealed systematic forgery. The internet moved faster than small-town gossip, spreading truth that couldn't be contained by local corruption. Reverend Mitchell organized an emergency resident meeting at the Methodist Church, providing sanctuary for displaced families while legal aid volunteers offered free consultation. Local businesses stepped up with job offers for residents facing financial crisis, proving that genuine community spirit could survive suburban cancer. EPA testing revealed groundwater contamination affecting the entire area, forcing immediate evacuation of Heritage Meadows families to local motels at federal expense. The water supply was declared unsafe, and cleanup estimates reached $25 million for environmental restoration that could take decades. U.S. Marshals secured Heritage Meadows as a federal crime scene, giving residents 48 hours to remove personal belongings before evidence collection began. The subdivision that had represented stolen American dreams became a monument to the consequences of greed disguised as community development. The corruption web unraveled faster than cheap yarn. County Sheriff Mike Ashworth got arrested for accepting bribes, 3 city council members faced federal charges for money laundering, and the bank president was indicted for mortgage fraud. FBI opened investigations into all Ashworth business dealings, discovering systematic theft spanning 2 decades. Vicky's desperate flight attempt came as federal agents tightened the noose. Airport security caught her at Nashville International with suitcases containing $2.3 million in bearer bonds, claiming the money was retirement savings despite no legitimate income source. The bonds traced to Cayman Islands accounts connected to the Russian money laundering network. National media trucks arrived as the story gained momentum, transforming a small-town festival into a circus of justice that would make constitutional law professors assign case studies for years. Social media hashtags, #HeritageScam and #JusticeForZeke trended nationally, proving that authentic David versus Goliath stories still captured American hearts. The stage was set for public confrontation that would expose decades of corruption while the cameras rolled. The festival gazebo transformed into an impromptu courthouse as federal agents, media crews, and half the county gathered for a showdown that would make Wild West historians jealous. The sweet smell of funnel cakes mixed with the acrid tension of exposed corruption, while children's laughter provided an innocent soundtrack to the collapse of Heritage Meadows' criminal empire. I stepped to the microphone wearing my grandfather's surveyor compass around my neck like a talisman, holding the original 1924 railroad easement document that would change everything. My voice carried across the crowd without amplification. 40 years of calling property boundaries had taught me how to project authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, looking directly at Vicky, who stood frozen like a deer in headlights. "I'm here to set the record straight about my family's land and the criminals who thought they could steal it." The crowd fell silent except for the distant hum of federal agents' radios and the flutter of evidence papers in the Tennessee breeze. I read key passages from my grandfather's contract aloud, explaining how the 1924 railroad easement automatically transferred ownership of any unauthorized construction to the Thornfield family. "Every house, every streetlight, every blade of grass in Heritage Meadows belongs to me under federal law," I announced, holding up the yellowed document like Moses presenting the 10 Commandments. My grandfather was smart enough to protect our family from exactly this kind of theft. Vicky pushed through the crowd like a woman possessed, grabbing the microphone with the desperation of someone watching their empire crumble in real time. "This is all lies and fake documents," she screamed, her carefully maintained suburban composure finally cracking like cheap veneer. "These people are part of a conspiracy against working families." That's when U.S. Attorney Marcus Webb stepped forward with arrest warrants, his federal authority cutting through local corruption like a hot knife through butter. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he read charges against Victoria Ashworth, 47 counts including fraud, money laundering, environmental crimes, and conspiracy to commit theft. "You have the right to remain silent," Marcus said as federal marshals placed handcuffs on Vicky's wrists. Her perfectly manicured hands looked almost fragile in the metal restraints, a fitting symbol of how delicate her criminal enterprise had always been. Heritage Meadows residents reacted with confusion and anger that split the crowd faster than a lightning strike. Maria Santos stepped forward to speak for families who'd been victimized by their own American dream. "We just wanted homes for our children," she said, her voice trembling with emotion and betrayal. "We didn't know about any fraud. We trusted these people with our life savings." Some residents turned their anger toward Vicky, finally understanding how thoroughly they'd been manipulated, while others defended her out of desperate hope that their property investments weren't worthless. The community division was painful to watch. Good people torn apart by criminals who'd hidden behind suburban respectability. I took the microphone back, addressing the confused families with the compassion Martha had taught me. "You folks are victims too. This isn't your fault. We'll work together to make this right. I'm offering fair rent-to-own agreements for anyone who wants to stay while we sort out the legal mess." Dr. Sarah Lightfoot chose that moment to drop the environmental bombshell, presenting soil contamination findings that silenced even the most defensive residents. The subdivision was built over toxic waste from an old chemical plant, with groundwater contamination extending far beyond Heritage Meadows' boundaries. "All residents must evacuate immediately for health safety," Dr. Lightfoot announced, her EPA authority brooking no argument. "The water supply is contaminated and the soil contains chemicals that pose serious health risks, especially to children." The media feeding frenzy exploded as reporters fired questions faster than an auctioneer's chant. How did county officials miss such obvious fraud? What's the total financial damage to victims? Will this lead to federal oversight of rural development? The story was becoming a national symbol of small-town corruption and environmental destruction. County Sheriff Mike Ashworth arrived with backup officers, attempting to assert local authority over federal agents in a jurisdictional pissing contest that would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. He discovered he was also under investigation for accepting bribes when federal marshals handed him his own arrest warrant. Ruby stepped forward to provide context for the gathered media, explaining how her investigation had uncovered a conspiracy spanning 4 years and multiple states. She credited Danny Kowalski's courage in exposing construction fraud and environmental cover-ups that endangered public health. The mic drop moment came when I pulled out my surveyor's measuring tape and walked to the property line, demonstrating exactly where Heritage Meadows sat on Thornfield land. "This tape measure doesn't lie, unlike some people," I said, looking directly at Vicky, who was being loaded into a federal transport vehicle. From the back of the police car, Vicky screamed her final outburst. "These people don't deserve nice homes anyway!" The racial slurs that followed, directed at Hispanic families in the crowd, revealed the true character behind her suburban mask and confirmed the discriminatory motives Ruby had suspected all along. Festival Day had become a public execution of corruption, broadcast live across social media and picked up by national news networks. Justice served cold with a side of environmental protection, all witnessed by half of Tennessee. 6 months later, Heritage Meadows stood like a suburban ghost town, yellow EPA tape fluttering in the Tennessee breeze where manicured lawns once spread their artificial perfection. The sweet scent of honeysuckle had returned, mixing with morning dew and the earthy smell of healthy soil as nature reclaimed stolen land. My cattle grazed peacefully where cookie-cutter McMansions once squatted like architectural tumors, proving that good land always outlasts bad ideas. The legal aftermath delivered justice with federal efficiency that would make Martha smile from heaven. Vicky Ashworth got 15 years in federal prison. Apparently, orange jumpsuits don't come with HOA badges. Brad received 20 years for racketeering, while Sheriff Mike Ashworth and 3 city council members earned 5-year vacations, courtesy of the federal penitentiary system. New oversight requirements mean future property thieves will need better lawyers and bigger bribes. 23 Heritage Meadows families accepted my rent-to-own offers, building sustainable homes on properly zoned land that respected environmental regulations and actual property rights. Maria Santos became our community liaison, her children now playing in clean streams where toxic runoff once flowed. Watching kids catch salamanders in restored wetlands reminded me why we fought so hard. The Thornfield Foundation launched with $20 million from the property windfall, funding scholarships for first-generation college students who understand that honest work beats suburban scheming every time. The Martha Thornfield Memorial Library anchors Sweetwater Springs downtown, offering free legal aid clinics that help property owners protect themselves from corporate predators with clipboards and fake smiles. 400 acres became the Thornfield Wildlife Sanctuary, protecting endangered salamanders and wetlands that educate future generations about environmental stewardship. The Climate Research Station attracts scientists from 3 universities, proving conservation and education create more jobs than fraudulent development ever could. Ruby's Pulitzer Prize launched her Washington Post career, but she returns annually for our Thornfield Heritage Festival. Her Emmy-winning documentary about heritage meadows became required viewing in journalism schools, teaching students that good reporting can literally save communities from destruction. Danny Kowalski testified before Congress about construction corruption, strengthening whistleblower protections that bear his name. His environmental restoration company employs other workers who chose conscience over corporate pressure. Turns out honesty pays better than fraud, with significantly less risk of federal prosecution. The national impact exceeded our expectations. FBI investigations uncovered similar schemes in 47 communities, shutting down $2.3 billion in fraudulent developments. Congressional task forces created federal property verification requirements that protect families from professional thieves masquerading as community developers. I teach surveying at the community college now, sharing 40 years of experience with students who will protect the next generation from boundary disputes and property fraud. Key lesson: accurate measurements and honest documentation built America. Everything else is just expensive decoration. Our annual Heritage Festival celebrates authentic local history with crafts, music, and storytelling that honor genuine community values. Former enemies collaborate on planning committees, proving shared purpose heals divisions created by greed faster than any therapy session. Environmental recovery exceeded our wildest hopes. Endangered species return to restored wetlands. Educational boardwalks allow school groups to study ecosystem recovery, and research data helps farmers adapt to climate change while protecting sensitive habitats. The metallic taste of morning mist over healthy wetlands beats suburban chlorine any day. Personal healing came like Tennessee sunrise, gradually, then suddenly, painting everything in colors Martha loved. I visit her grave each evening, reporting community progress and scholarship recipients who benefit from our stand against corruption. Her journal's final entry still guides me. Zeke fights for what's right, not what's easy. Here's what this taught me. Standing up for what's right often means standing alone initially, but honest documentation and principled allies attract good people to your cause. My grandfather understood that land represents responsibility to future generations who deserve better than environmental destruction disguised as progress. Property rights matter because they protect families from predators who exploit the American dream for profit. When someone tries to steal your land, they're stealing your family's history and your children's future. Have you battled HOA nightmares or property disputes? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might provide the courage another family needs to fight back against professional thieves hiding behind community development. Together, we can expose fraud before it destroys more families. Subscribe to HOA Stories for more tales of ordinary people defeating extraordinary corruption. Your support helps us investigate small-town fraud, proving that justice prevails when honest folks unite against suburban schemes and environmental destruction.
Thanks for watching HOA Stories. If this episode made you laugh or shake your head at HOA madness, hit that like button and drop your opinion below. We post HOA Karen Chaos and Neighborhood Showdowns every week, so be sure to subscribe to catch the next unbelievable story.